All right, welcome on YouTubers. Thanks so much for joining us here. We are not doing this live at the moment, but we don't really edit the video, so you're just going to get what you're going to get here. John, your reaction to the Utah Jazz being fined under the league's player participation policy.
Well, it's interesting. The Jazz had the temerity to have an all-star on their team, and so it was for them. It wasn't for the 5 different times Walker Kessler needed DNP rest, right? It was for them sitting out Lowry Markkinen, and I think
Yeah, well, that was just supposed to be a facial reaction. We haven't actually started the show yet.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
All right.
Yes, my facial reaction to that is
Okay.
yeah, little eye roll. I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe not.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do a podcast. Here we go.
All right.
All right, welcome on everyone, and this is maybe something we're going to do as a yearly tradition as well. Sadly, Zach Lowe not able to join us this year, but about this time last year, it was actually the first week of April, we did a pod where we went and looked at basically, I don't know if we would say it was a draft necessarily, but we discussed the players that the three of us, you, me, and him, thought were most likely to be on another team by the beginning of the 25-26 season. So basically a summer, a trade deadline, and a summer away, 3 transaction cycles. So we're going to go back and look at what we said back then, and then we're going to do it again this year. But the news has short-circuited our best laid plans. We must discuss the Utah Jazz being fined $100,000 on the league's player participation policy for Lowry Markkinen not being available on March 5th against the Washington Wizards, a game that I actually did for Dunked On Prime.
Oh my goodness.
Or at least Dan and I talked about it afterwards. The Utah Jazz managed to lose that game, as they have so many this season. And they also said Markkinen's was that this was for other recent games that Markkinen was not made available as well. What do you make of that?
I think they were a little late as far as the horse leaving the barn, right, on this, because it's been going on, and I mean Toronto's been doing some dodgy stuff, although that's been more in game. I think
Yeah,
what they've been doing is saying, oh, we have a minutes limit on all these guys, which, not that I would have ever done such a thing, but we had a situation a little bit like that in 2018. But so the Raptors been a little more clever about that, I think, than the Jazz. I mean, the fine is 100,000, which is it's a 10-day, right? So, but
yeah,
they do get progressively more. So over these final few weeks, the Jazz could be looking at getting fined real money if they do this a couple more times. So they do have some incentive to try to play by the rules as much as they can. Now, interestingly, it applies to players who were all-stars, right? So it applies for Markkinen, it applies for Scotty Barnes in Toronto. But Walker Kessler, I think he's had 5 DNP rest situations in like the last 3 weeks, and it doesn't apply to him. So it's sort of interesting how teams are going right up to the line on this and then kind of pulling back. A little surprised. Like, we'll see what New Orleans does the rest of the way. We'll see what Charlotte does. But these
yeah.
bottom
Zion's
7
been on a
teams,
minutes limit.
yes,
Has been on a minutes limit as well in New Orleans.
yeah,
Actually playing exceedingly well of late.
yeah. His minutes limit might be like 4 after what he did to the Clippers last night, right?
No, I agree. And Markkinen, of course, let's go back to the summer when I posited it seems like that was probably right, that they essentially paid him more money than they needed to in his renegotiation and extension. They pushed him up to the max and then gave him an extension that wasn't quite the absolute max that he could get, but seemed like they basically were buying his silence for a year with $25 million that they didn't really have to give him. They could have
Yeah,
given him like 10 more and still extended him up to the max had they
Yeah.
wanted to. And it was very clear from the moment they started with this team what it was going to be. But as usual, Will Hardy, as with kind of a crappy roster, managed to make them competitive. Certainly far too competitive for the absolute dregs here. Dan, I went through it the other day. 9 teams I would characterize as tanking right now. Your money may vary on the Spurs, whether you think they are at this point or not. But they did manage to lose to the Mavs yesterday.
I think they're tanking by accident. I think they're just bad enough without Victor, and they haven't really figured out how to incorporate Fox yet. So I think they're actually just not that good.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite true. Also, yeah, Chris Paul's still there, obviously. Yeah, Will Hardy always manages to coach these guys up. If you look at their record when John Collins and Walker Kessler and Markkanen play of late, considering how badly everyone else that they are going up against, like say the Wizards are trying to tank. Actually, the Wizards have lost so many games already; they're not even trying that hard to tank
Yeah, they don't
anymore.
need to anymore.
So I guess the question becomes, I mean, they activated, I think, Jordan Clarkson, who's also been on the shelf lately, uh, for tonight's game. And Bobby Marks pointed this out on Twitter that there's a pattern of like single game rests. And yeah, of course, Markkanen made the All-Star team in 23. So you think this is going to change anything? Next fine, 250K?
I think it's only going to change things that they don't want to accidentally tripwire themselves into the point where they're getting fined like $1 million. You know what I mean? So I think the prudent course is to try to avoid getting the 250 so that you don't get which is the next level of fine, so that you don't put yourself in deeper danger. I mean, you still have 16 games left or whatever, 17, I guess, for Utah. So you still have a pretty decent chunk of the season to like put yourself in some kind of jeopardy. So you do want to manage this a little carefully. I mean, because you're probably okay right now, basically, right? You're probably going to have one of the 4 worst records. You have to win 7 more times just to catch Brooklyn, even if they don't win another game this year, or Toronto or Philly. They all have 22 wins. Utah only has 15. So you probably don't have to do that much at this point to assure yourself of at least the 4 best odds and mathematically a top 8 pick. You've kept the pick from Oklahoma City for another year, right? Like your work here is mostly done.
Yeah, well, I think though, one thing that was an unintended consequences or an unintended consequence, as there always are with these, is your downside is now greater under this new flattened lottery odds. Because the idea was, hey,
Yeah.
you know what? Like you still got a pretty decent chance that you finish with the second worst record or 7th worst record of getting into the top 4. Why would you tank? And that actually maybe kind of apply in that range. Of course, you've got Philly quite going for it as well at this point, just due to the protection on their pick. Chicago would have been doing that had they not traded for their pick back. But the issue is, even if you have a possible drop of 4. So to me, and you only still have a 50% chance, even if you get the worst record, just about, of being in the top 4. So it's really more about avoiding the downside. You mentioned 4, like the having it down, especially in this draft. You know more about this draft than me, but the difference between 5 and 8 in this draft, from my limited understanding, is a massive one. And so that's why I think they're pushing like this.
Yeah, I mean, it does still matter, especially if you don't win the lottery. I mean, I will say, if you have one of the 4 worst records, usually you're only going to get pushed down to like 6 if you don't get into the top 4, because the teams that are in the top 4 are going to be other lottery teams. So you have to get hit by the deck a little bit to like get pushed down to 8 if you have the 4th worst record.
Yeah, I guess. Well, I mean, if you think about it, if you, as the 4th worst record, don't, yeah, I mean, I guess because you're right, the 4 teams would have to pass them.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But it's easier the higher you are to have teams pass you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, I mean, if I were running the Utah Jazz, I would be doing this. Like, and
Oh,
I would tell
100%.
you what,
Yeah.
$100,000 isn't going to stop me. Maybe
Uh,
I'll provide some more lip service, or fine, I'll play Larry Markkinen fucking 20 minutes and play him,
yeah.
tether him to Cody Williams and hope that that's enough. But
Yes.
yeah, it's
Yeah. Yeah. That's the other option that's always out there is just it's not resting good players, it's playing bad players, right? That's always the card that's still available.
oh man, I can't wait to see what happens in this Philly Toronto game today. That's gonna be a classic. I just Toronto, they're sunk. They're not gonna outtank Brooklyn and Philly at this point. Like they're gonna have the seventh worst record. Like
I think so.
it's
They
just
have
gonna happen.
like they just have so many winnable games against teams that are also tanking that it's just going to be really hard for them.
Well, the other thing that's gonna be interesting though is Tyrese Maxey and Paul George, for that matter. Both of those guys are subject to this policy.
Yes.
Embiid, I think you've got a pretty good argument for him being out for the whole year, given what's taken place. But
Yeah.
PG has this groin issue, and yeah, it's been bothering him all year. I don't know if they can get 17 more games or whatever it is out of a groin issue. Maxey's young, like he had this back sprain, but Nick Nurse is talking about him uh, being capable of coming back at this point relatively soon. But this is especially again, given where Philly is with this top six protected pick and the imperative that they have to at least get to 5 and give themselves a chance. And they're tied with Brooklyn right now. All Brooklyn,
Yeah.
Toronto, and Philly, as of now, are all tied at 22 wins.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
So I agree. The
that's gonna
imperative
be
for
fascinating.
Philly is higher, where it's for Philly, it's probably worth it more to incur more in fines, right? Just because the downside is so much worse because they could lose the pick entirely. It's not just about being 7 instead of 6. It's between 6 and not having the pick, right?
Yeah. But even Utah, like we saw it with the marketing thing, the rookies that they drafted over the last few years. This is what this season was all about, pretty unabashedly. And so I don't think that I mean once you get up to $1 million, then maybe you start to worry about it not being like a smart move, just
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the overall organization. But there, I don't think we've heard the last of this yet, whether it's Utah or one of these other teams.
Yeah, and you wonder if the league is gonna at some point ratchet up what the penalties are in response, or if they just throw their hands up and say like there's only so much we can do about this.
All right, let's talk about these potential stars to be traded. We did this beginning of April last year. And again, to reiterate what we said was who is the most likely stars to be traded by the beginning of the 25-26 season. So that hasn't even happened yet, but many of these guys have traded or will be traded. We both re-listened to last year's show. What sticks out to you about either things that we got right, things that we got wrong, things that have changed since then? Maybe we'll just leave Luca out of it because we've talked about Luca so
Yeah,
much
right.
at this point.
Yeah,
Although I will
yeah.
note that he was my first round draft pick
It's
in this, but not.
hilarious. It's hilarious that he was traded for completely different reasons than we thought he might end up getting traded. Because I was going
Yeah,
to take Luca in this quote unquote draft if you didn't, and and that he's ended up being traded, just not for any of the logic that we thought. I think it's pretty hilarious that my first two picks were Carl Anthony Towns and Julius Randle.
well, this is what you even said on the show. You said we talked about Towns first. That was your first pick, and you just talked
Mm,
about the money. We actually, I think, hilariously, after we had gone through the playoffs, we probably felt like, oh, he's much less likely to be traded now. The
yeah,
Wolves were still a top 3 seed, but we didn't think they were going to get to the West Finals necessarily. We said, oh, if they make a deep playoff run, they'll probably hold on to him. But then your second pick being Randall, you were saying, oh yeah, he's got to be the matching salary from the Knicks to get to a Townsian number. So
oh man.
pretty good there. You weren't
Yeah.
necessarily even thinking about Towns, but you're thinking about one of these other like 35%
Yeah.
stars.
Yeah.
But that was quite prescient as it turned out.
Excellent. I got something right. All right.
Yeah, isn't it great that we blab so much that we actually like end up being right about this stuff?
Even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. Well, there's
Yeah,
a guy from last year that has not been traded yet, but I would presume would be number one if we did this exercise when we do this exercise again. Uh, so I thought that was interesting. Zach on the show picked Kevin Durant last year with one of his picks, and I think it's pretty obvious that he's the first domino this summer. I mean, we're basically at that point with Phoenix being in a tailspin and needing to figure out some way out of it, and sounding pretty pot committed to the Devin Booker experience. So uh, that one seems like the one that is most bankable at the moment. Would you agree with that?
yeah. I mean, it's been reported that they're going to work together on a trade. They're not going to finish above the 9 seed. I would be shocked if they make the playoffs for that reason at this point.
Yeah.
It's been a complete disaster there emotionally, and yeah, KD also can control his destination in a way this summer that he maybe couldn't at the deadline. He only has 1 year left on his deal. He's going to try to get paid. All this is going to be is indicating that he's going to be on the way out. But great work there by Zach. He was sort of like, yeah, this things might not go too well in Phoenix, and that he's just going to be gone. Going to want to be gone by. I mean, he wasn't necessarily predicting that or reporting that, but he just said like, "I've seen this movie before." But it's not really necessarily even KD wanting to be out until they tried to trade him. It's just it hasn't worked, and they're really expensive. Like the reporting is, they're going to try to get under the second apron in this deal.
Yeah, which makes sense, even though they've done so much to prevent themselves from being able to do that over the last couple of years. It's kind of funny that they're retrenching now after everyone was like telling them for the last 2 years, like this is what would happen.
I still can't believe that they made that Utah deal. That it's just to trade their 2031 unprotected pick
Right?
and pick up 3 dog shit picks, one of which they already traded in the Nurkic salary dump. I mean, that's crazy to me. I mean, I guess that is going to be part of what gets them under the second apron, is having done that salary dump. But man, that's
Right?
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Trade a
Um,
dollar for 3 quarters.
so yeah, I mean, it's actually shocking how many of these people have moved. I had Brandon Ingram as a late pick. Like we brought up Zion at one point, and I was like, no, I think it's going to be Ingram. He was hurt
Mm-hmm.
at the time, came
Yep.
back, and that played very little for the Pels again. Now he's on the Toronto Raptors. I'll give you some credit for Jimmy Butler, John. That was a pretty good one.
Well, I mean, I was already hearing some stuff, and so I kind of went with that a little bit. I didn't know it would get this bad, but it just the fact that they were always talking about Bam as the leader and the keeper of the culture, that was like such a red flag to me that kind of unwittingly telling us what they really think of Jimmy. And so I guess that was the thing that put me on that scent.
No, that and then that they didn't extend him obviously became even more of that. And it seemed, I mean, I think we also felt like they would do more maybe in the playoffs than they did. And, Giannis is the one you predicted, and I would have said the same thing at the time, that if the Bucks flamed out as they did last year and then weren't that good this year, as they haven't been, that we would really be on Giannis watch throughout this season. I will give
Yeah.
him credit at least that he is avoided throughout all the years, like any kind of drama in season. He's had some comments in the off season at
Yeah.
times, but and I think also maybe the fact that Giannis was hurt last year, him being out was the reason that they flopped. I still think they could have
Mhm.
done something, especially the way Chris Middleton was playing last year in the playoffs, so which I guess he's just never going to be at that level again. But certainly you would have to think like if they go out in a meek second round loss, which is probably the most likely outcome for them at this point. Like they've been
Yeah.
completely ineffective against any of the league's really good teams, other than OKC in the NBA Cup final. That's So he's still got to be up there. He'll be a big draft pick for me again this year because they're just like if they don't do it this year, like yeah, they traded Middleton for Kuzma. They got a little bit cheaper. Like I don't think that was a bad move, but I still just don't see how like these are supposed to be the 2 good years for Dame, and I don't know that he's at that level anymore where he can be that even the number 2 guy, and I think that's really gonna go somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think the chemistry is better between those two, but I don't know if the high end quality is enough there for them to make any kind of run, especially in the when you look at those two titans at the top of the East, you basically have to get through both of them probably consecutively just to get to the finals.
Any of these other ones that sticks out to you?
Uh, so Donovan Mitchell, obviously, everyone was thinking about him, and that's completely gone away, right? He signed the extension. Cleveland's awesome. He's not going anywhere. You would think, right?
Yeah, you pointed out that the weird regression of Darius Garland last year was a factor. He's come back and been awesome. Mobley has also taken a big step forward. Zach was like, "Yeah, I think Evan Mobley is really on track," and yeah, good for him to not sell that stock. He's been to me. I actually had him fifth in MVP when we did it a little bit ago, and so it's not like they had a great playoffs. They did at least win a round, but the one thing I said that I think was part of it too is just where else was he going to go last offseason? Like Brooklyn, like that wouldn't have been any better.
Yeah,
So that was where it was being talked about. The Knicks, once they got Jalen Brunson and he turned into a star, that was the presumed destination. That was no longer on the table any longer. So they're just Miami is, maybe that would have made some sense, but that never. It seemed like really it was all right. Just go back to Cleveland. He signed a shorter term deal to get to the experience to get a 35% max in a couple of years. So, but I still, as good as they've been, I don't think we're going to hear much about that. And, I mean, the biggest, but it's worth noting, and maybe you really like Kenny Atkinson. I don't know, but it just seems like ultimately the lack of anywhere else to go was the biggest factor because we didn't know how good Cleveland was going to be when he actually did
yeah,
resign.
yeah. Him being able to go to a better team at this point seems highly unlikely. So
Another really good point by Zach. I picked Joel Embiid as someone who might want to go. Instead, they extended him, and it's now quite the opposite. It seems that is an albatross, but Zach was like, "Hey, he's getting a little old. Like, when is the
yeah,
point where a team isn't going to necessarily want to trade for him?" He had been out with the surgery. He was like just then coming back. He played like 5 games, 4 or 5 games at the end of last year, and but was not himself. And then of course it's gone the way it's gone since then. But that was one where you felt like, oh well, what if they don't get anybody in free agency? Of course they did get somebody. Paul George, you were all over that, saying Philly
yep,
could be in the mix there because the Clippers weren't going to pay PG his full max. So I think we did pretty well here. I mean, there's even Trey Young. Zach brought him up as his first round pick. I was like, well, like how much is his trade value really? That may be revisited again this offseason. There's been a little bit of smoke around that for Mike Scotto and what his extension might be from the
right.
Hawks. But it was we knew it was either going to be him or DeJounte, and it just ended up being DeJounte who had a little bit more value there. So there isn't anyone here that I look back on and I'm like, oh, this is like, oh, maybe Jalen Williams just
That
because he's
was
become so good in
Yeah, that was the
OKC.
one because I thought he would be the chip that would get them a star, and I think in OKC's mind, he is that star. So it's going to be Shea, Chet, and Jalen uh, until further notice.
Yeah, we even mentioned Zach Levine at the end. He was having the year from hell. Looked like he would be untradeable, but he came back and played well. And like once he got back to the level he'd been at, they were able to move him.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into this year.
Okay.
KD, I assume I'll give you the honor as your number one pick.
Yes. Uh huh.
All right, we talked about why that
He
is.
is the Wembanyama of this draft. I mean, it really comes down to what are the destinations and what can Phoenix reasonably expect in return for a guy at his age who's only signed for one more year. You presumably can do some kind of extended trade with him um, to keep him where he wants to be a little longer. Um, But again, because of his age, I think that's just a concern that's going to weigh on the receiving team. So there's a very particular type of team that would be going after him. And most of those teams are good enough already that they don't need to. Minnesota's an interesting one, but what do they have asset wise that they can really put in that would tempt Phoenix? I mean, what can they do? Like a 32 first and Dillingham or something? Um, and you have to have Randall as a match. So, teams that can help Phoenix get out of their financial quandary, I think, move to the front of the line here. Uh, Orlando is an interesting name just because they need the offense. I don't think the fit or the timing or what they're trying to do is really quite right.
Yeah, wouldn't fit into the salary structure once Paolo is extended as well. KD's going to want to go somewhere where he's got more than 1 year left. Like if the price got so low that Orlando's like, hey, we'll just rent him for a year. But even if they got KD, I just don't, especially from what we've seen this season, I don't think like you only make the trade for KD and pay him what you're going to pay him and give that up if you feel like once he gets in the door, we have a
Yeah,
championship contender. I don't think that is Orlando.
yeah. What did Indiana think about it?
It just doesn't seem like a KD destination. I
Well,
mean, the one that it should be is Oklahoma City.
yeah, right. That's the perfect one. Yeah, without a doubt. And then do they
Yeah.
have?
Now that
They certainly have enough asset wise that they can get there, especially if they're willing to go into the tax for a year or two. And salary match is actually, I think they could pretty much get there. They might have to put in one like real player, but I don't think it's that overwhelming for them to get there.
yeah. That I mean, now does he want to go back there? Does Sam Presti want to fuck up his precious culture? Those are uh, all things. I mean, I do think like a big question to me is where does KD see himself at this point in his career? Is he still going to be concerned about the narrative? Is he still thinking like I need to burnish my resume by being a top 2 guy? Would he be concerned that he's going to join a team that would be some super team? That'd probably be the
Yeah,
thinking with OKC. Oh, they just won 66 games. KD's
I
going to
do.
join them. What a
I
surprise.
I do
Yeah, so you'll
think
get that stuff.
I do think if OKC wins the title this year, it lowers the odds of him going there dramatically. I do think
It
that.
just I don't think. I mean, I think for the same reason KD didn't want to go back to Golden State, he wouldn't want to go back to OKC, and I'm not sure OKC would want to do it either because they just it doesn't seem like an OKC kind of move to make, and a lot of it would be the extension too because Chet, Jalen Williams, Shea on a super max, and KD, who probably could still demand a max salary at 35%. That may not even be doable, but
Mhm.
if they could get KD to extend for something lower as like a number where it's kind of he's more like your third best player, he's like you could get him for like we'll give you a 3-year $100 million extension or a 3-year $120 million extension, maybe then. But yeah, I don't know. So I think KD is our first draft. I
Houston
will
would be
say
the
the
other one.
pickings. Yes. Yeah. Although Houston supposedly is very focused on Devin Booker instead. I think Houston more so than OKC has a longer time horizon. And Houston might even have more issues in terms of paying everyone going forward. Although
Yeah,
that might be actually a reason to move, say, like Atari Eason, because they just can't really afford to pay him anyway. So you might as well just move him and take back more of a veteran.
yeah.
Um, so here's what I'll say: the
Mhm.
pickings here are very slim compared to last year. I mean,
I
we
agree with
really went
that.
through a lot of these guys. Like they're
Yeah,
either all the really good players are guys who are really like in good situations. You don't think they're necessarily going to move. I don't know that 26 free agency. Like you are hearing something about it a little bit, and we still have all the way through to next offseason.
yep. kind of a one-player draft, so I'm interested to see which direction you go here.
I'm gonna say, yeah, I think it still has to be Giannis is number one for me. He's just the one guy who's at that top 5 level that he's said things about wanting to move on before if they're not a contender. I think this year will finally definitively prove that. It'll have then been 4 consecutive years not getting beyond the second round, might even be 3 consecutive years not getting beyond the first round.
Yeah.
And I think Lillard is going to kind of show that he's great player. I still respect him a lot, like in all NBA consideration this year. But I think he's just going to show that he doesn't quite have enough. And if you look at their offense, John, like they're supposed to be this awesome offensive team. They're like not in the top 10 in offense this year.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how it is that these guys have enough of a fastball to go up against a Cleveland or a Boston, and they've been totally non-competitive with those teams in the regular season.
Yeah, the team they've been most competitive against, and you even go back previous years, it's Oklahoma City, who unfortunately is in the other conference.
Yeah, and Giannis, he's still got plenty of time left. He's only under contract for 2 more years, then he's got a player option. But he also next year will be his age 31 season. So he's kind of running out of time at this
Yeah.
point, particularly as the best guy he and where he would go, I don't know. You know, the Golden State has always kind of loomed for him as a possibility. The matching salary there would be interesting. It probably would have to be Jimmy.
Yeah. Yeah.
if they did go that route.
Yeah.
But I would be fascinated to know where Giannis could go. That's the other question is just, but he's got 2 years left on his deal, so he might not have that much control over it. But I guess well, no, he would because the Bucks would never move him unless he wanted out. So
Yeah, exactly.
he will be in control.
Even though it might be the right thing for them to do at some point here.
Yeah, although he's as much of an icon there, probably almost as Steph Curry is. I think for what the Bucks have been, they already won a championship with him. You're just not.
And
they would never move him.
A championship and an NBA Cup, Nate.
Yeah, the NBA Cup is something that I really enjoyed in the moment, but it also seems rather ephemeral in that once it's over.
Yeah, everyone totally forgets about it. Like, who was in the final again? Like, wait, let me think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for overseas fans, like if your team wins, you know, the cup in England or Spain or something, is that something that is looked back? Is that given as much of a is that given as much primacy as winning the league? I mean, the league too, like in most of these things, you win the league and then the season's just over. There's no playoffs after that either. So
Yeah.
that kind of you split everything up a little bit, and then of course you've got Europe as well. But I think the fact that in these domestic leagues you either have the whole league season or you have this cup that doesn't follow it, that is what gives the cup way more importance than if you're just doing it in season, then you also have a playoffs in the same league. It's sort of like, well, yeah, this is just like a playoffs light. What
Yeah.
gives the in-season cup something in Europe, and now in basketball, it's a little bit different, obviously, but in soccer, which is really what Silver is going for, that's why this is your only tournament style thing. So it does. That's the biggest reason it means more.
And those cups also, it tends to mean more the worse your team is. Like otherwise, you look like, especially early in the quote unquote cup rounds, like they're playing all the elite teams are playing their backups in those games, and like, okay, we'll call them the starters if like we get to the final.
All right, who's your next pick?
All right, this was hard, but so we have 2 offseason. Okay, first of all, my next pick. Actually, the guy I would take next, the problem is I don't actually think he's a star. And we're talking about star players getting traded, right?
Yeah.
I wrote down the name Jalen Green, right? Like it's like probably something happens with that in the next, we have 3 cycles coming up, 2 off seasons and a trade deadline. Like he's going to be going out in one of them at some point. but is he a star? I don't think we're there yet. So as far as an actual star, um, let me go a little bit against the grain here. I'm going to say Anthony Davis.
Yeah, he was the guy I was struggling with between him and Giannis. Now, would Nico Harrison have to get fired?
Yes, 100%. Yes, that is part of the event chain that I was envisioning that would result in his being traded. Yes, he gets
Yeah.
fired, the Mavs retool, and Davis goes out for picks and whatever.
Yeah, because after this Kyrie injury, I've been saying this since the moment he got hurt, that what they
Yeah,
should
that's
do
that's the
is
only
just trade Anthony Davis. Like
that's all they
it's
have
done
left with
well.
their hand. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
totally the logical move. But I just don't know if they're in a rational place right now.
yeah. Now, and if they trade for like KD this offseason, then maybe it's a little bit different, and you feel
Oh,
like it's worth
Dallas
holding on to
trading for
these guys. But
KD. Oh, come on.
I wouldn't rule it out. They have enough ammo to go get him if they really want to. Yeah, I mean, I think
Wow.
that's right for AD too. His contract situation, we're still trying to figure out actually whether he can extend this offseason or not. I think he can because he could just opt out of his deal. He signed a 5-year deal, so that would be a 3-year delay. But oh god, I this is so hilarious, John. I've been doing this ever since the trade. Every time I go to like look something up about AD, I just
Go to the
reflexively
Lakers
click on the
page.
Lakers
Yeah.
tab. And every
Yeah.
time I go to look something up about Luca, I reflexively click on the Dallas tab. Um, but yeah, so if AD, I'm pretty sure if he opts out, then he'd be eligible to sign an extension this offseason. He's expressed a desire to want to do that. And that was before, of course, he knew Kyrie would be injured. But at his age, if you can tack on more years, you do it. But I think at this point, he would be. I'm interested to see what happens this summer. Like they're not going to do it this summer unless Harrison gets fired.
Yeah.
And then
100%.
could he move? Like, what if he doesn't make it through? I think there are a lot of variables there. It makes so much sense that you think it should be done, but the idea that they would trade him before Kyrie comes back, it seems just they're so doubled down on this group that I doubt they would do that. So that leaves you one off season, and Kyrie will presumably sign a new contract. Like he'll be back. They'll be like, "Oh, Kyrie, just it's impossible. Like maybe he doesn't even play next year." It's like, "Oh, we haven't seen this group. Kyrie was just coming back. We got to keep it together for one more cycle." So that's why I ultimately didn't pick him. Is I think they're just going to be way too bullheaded on it. And like you said, it's only if Harrison gets fired that I think this happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right.
All right, my next pick here. If I was going to say Giannis, then Lillard also wouldn't be long for the Milwaukee Bucks. Damian Lillard
Oh.
actually only has one more year left on his deal and then a player option. You could see a team trading for him and then he opts out of that player option and goes for something less. I don't know what Lillard's trade value would be. I mean, to make the All-Star team this year, he's making $54 million, but that's a lot of money for that production. That would, but he still is an all-star level player. He falls in here, but it would, if they move Giannis, they surely would move Lillard as well. You would think
Yeah.
he would ask out.
Yeah. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yeah, that's an interesting one because that's as you say, it's the corresponding domino. I didn't really think of Lillard because I was just thinking of Giannis. That's a good one.
All right, your next pick.
My next pick is Kawhi Leonard. I just think the Clippers, if they can establish his health to the point where they can get anything for him, I think they have to take it. And he's now getting to the point where he'll have 2 years left after this one, or he'll be an expiring the year after. So you're not taking on as much risk if you're the acquiring team. And the Clippers, even as much as they've kind of ground out this season and gone forward and say, okay, we're just going to try to win since we owe the pick anyway, and have done a pretty decent job of it. You could tell, I mean, even at the margins, that they're thinking about what's next. They want to truly compete and not just chase 45 wins. And so I think that's part of it is trying to get to the point where they can sell high on him. And I think he's the one even more than James that because he's making 50 million for the next 2 years, I mean, he really ties them in to a strategy that they're in a pathway that they don't really want to be on right now.
Well, the other thing that ties them into that pathway is that they don't control their pick until 2031.
Yeah. Yeah. So if they could do something like you almost prefer not so much trading him for picks, but trading him for young talent. I mean, that would be the ideal win for them. But I think for them to just kind of get out of Dodge on that one and come away with something, I think at that point that would be a win for them, given how unavailable Leonard has been over the last couple of years.
What is that something? How much would they have to get back for him for it to be worth it?
Uh, Ideally, you're probably looking at 2 firsts and less matching salary than you sent out. And they might not even be amazing firsts. You know what I mean?
I just don't think they can get that though. It's not
They
the way
can't
he's
get
played so far this year.
like I don't think they can get what Toronto got for Siakam, right? That ship has probably sailed. Would you agree with that?
So the Toronto for Siakam, they got 2 picks in the 20s in that year's draft, and then they got a top 4 protected 26 first from a good team. Yeah, I wouldn't think so. Like he would if he had come back, and who knows, maybe we'll see in the play-in or the playoffs. He's starting to play a little bit better recently, but has not been because the level he was at before he got hurt last year was nasty. Like I had him as
Yeah,
a top 5
100%.
MVP candidate until he got hurt
Yep,
last year.
yep.
So he's not quite there yet. But and I could see the way I could see it happening is in like next summer 2026 he'd be an expiring contract and then he'd be like, all right, he's a good player, he'll still help us, we got some crap here, we'll give up a first, or maybe at the 26th draft we'll give up our first this year and our first next year and send back just terrible salary to get him on a 1 year deal, but that will be of course his age 35 season. I Yeah,
The
it
other
seems though.
pathway,
Yeah.
the other pathway to me is if he's really good in a first round series that ends before he can get injured. And so like that's the last thing that people saw.
Yeah, so I'm not ruling it out, but then it's like they've been better than expected this year. If they were, on pace for what I thought they were going to be this year, which was like 35 wins,
Mm-hmm.
then I would be more on board with what you're saying. But I think that just keeping him around to win 45 games is actually worth something. And they're not going to get a building block piece going forward. They're not going to get a pick that has a lot of upside, at least as it appears at the time the trade is made, by moving him, given how much he's made in the injury history, unless he's just like looking like he could be a top 15 player in the league again. And then at that point, it's like, well, we still got James Harden. We still like Zubats. We got this great defense. Norm
Mm-hmm.
Powell's had this renaissance. Like, yeah, you know what? Like, let's just at least we could be the 5th seed this year. Like, that's fine. Like, so I mean, the numbers with him on the floor are actually still surprisingly very good.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's just for where they are not having like if they had their picks, I would totally agree with you. Yeah, go ahead, move them, get what you can. But I think they are just gonna sort of like want to hold on to him for unless there's really an overwhelming return. He's worth more to them to me than to anybody else.
I think
But I
that
don't know,
is
it's really
definitely true. I think that's definitely true right now. I just think we have 3 windows where that can change. So I'm interested to see what happens.
no. He was on my list too. I'm just sort of like wondering who is the team that's gonna make it worth their while because he is in theory gonna he still is a draw, he still can help them win some games. I just like yeah, if he came back and it's like, hey, we can get like a massive franchise reset type of package, of course they would move him. But I just don't think that's out there given what he's making and how well he's playing and the injury history. All right, that was your third round pick.
That was
I'm gonna
my
go ahead out there and
was that my oh
throw
yeah,
in
that
Lauri
was my
Markkinen.
third. That was my third round
Yeah.
pick. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Lauri Markkanen is my guy now.
Oh. Huh.
He will be eligible to be traded this offseason.
Mm-hmm.
Makes a fair amount of money. Quietly has had a pretty bad year by his standards. Dunks are way down. Rim protection is way down. Sure, it's been a malaise-filled season as we began the
Mm-hmm.
show with, but he definitely doesn't look nearly as explosive as he did 2 years ago. He's getting older, just taking a lot of jumpers this year. Still a very good player, but so much of course, depends on what happens to the Jazz in the draft too. Maybe I actually think that the more lottery luck they have, the less likely he is to be traded. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm trying to figure out what it looks like. Like if they get Cooper Flag, first of all, the
Yeah.
jokes about Utah having a flagged Markin and Kessler front court will never cease. But we'll move on from that. The Does he fit though with those two other guys? You know, can he play? Does he have enough three in him, or can Flag guard threes? Where that really works, or would you be better off trading Markkinen for more of a backcourt guy?
Yeah, maybe, and more of a future too. I think they will still be listening. I actually kind of like that front court a little bit. Like Marketing could play the three on offense, no problem. I mean, he could play the
Yeah.
two on offense, frankly, the way he shoots it. And you would have this massive team that'd be pretty good defensively. You would still need one more backcourt piece, but they could probably trade for that as well. I think they would be ready to hit the gas next year, and that's a group that even could be approach 500. I think if they are drafting seventh and they get another project, it's kind of like, man, we still don't have the guy. We're
Mm-hmm.
so far away. Are we going to just get fined by the league again?
Yeah.
Because Markkinen still made the All-Star team in 23, he'll still be in the player participation uh,
You also
policy.
wonder if that was part of the discussion when he signed that extension. Like, how many years of my prime are you going to waste here?
Yeah. So I think if
Yeah.
they are in and they could also even make a trade to supplement around him too, but I don't think they would do that unless they felt like, okay, we have the piece now in the draft that we're going to build around. If they don't get that guy in this draft, then I think it's pretty likely that he is traded because they need to continue being bad and finding a star somehow because Markkinen obviously is a good player, but he's not your number one best player. He's someone I think who would have a market. He fits nearly anywhere,
Yeah.
fewer places than when he was making 17 million, but still. And there's also the possibility too that he turns into a pumpkin, that he didn't have that good of a year. He has been somewhat injury prone. He's had some of these back issues and hips and stuff like that. So it's maybe you do just have to sell high at this point in time, especially if you're like, well, like what's the point of holding on to him?
Yeah.
Or if we're gonna win 33 games with him this year, and then we're gonna draft another guy, and then how long until that guy's ready? Now Markkinen's 30 or 31, and we missed our chance to move him because if he has another year like this year next year, then he's gonna be
Then
viewed as a
I'll,
bad contract.
yeah, exactly. You're not going to get any assets for him. Yeah. That's a great point.
Your next pick.
My next pick, same book, different verse or different chapter. LaMelo Ball.
Didn't have him on my list, but I should have.
3 years left on his deal. Charlotte is still going nowhere. The Tijan Salon is not about to take over the league. They tried to trade Mark Williams for assets. So they're just a long way away. And you talk to people about LaMelo for all his you know branding and bling or whatever, and his style of play, that he's a pretty low key guy, wants to win, not like a troublemaker. So isn't maybe going to be a guy who pushes his way out of there. But I just think Charlotte's situation. I'm sorry, but Ball's actually signed for 4 more years.
Yeah.
But I just think in Charlotte's situation, it's like it's a little bit like what are we doing here, right? Are we really building a good team on Ball's timeline, or is it really on the next timeline that whatever's going to happen happens? And they are not, unlike Utah, they are not flush with draft assets right now. They have some stuff, but not nearly what Utah has from trading Gobert and Mitchell. So they do have an incentive to replenish that more.
I think it really depends what they get in the draft as well. I think Brandon Miller going down for the season with this wrist issue is a major problem. Mark Williams, like you said, they don't really seem to believe that he's the guy as a foundational piece. He's going to need to get paid this offseason as well. You mentioned that LaMelo seems happy there. Mike Scotto, his piece alluded to maybe the idea that LaMelo wasn't happy that he didn't make the All-Star team, even with his big numbers. Now, his numbers have actually been declining quite a bit of late.
Mm-hmm.
And like he still is playing this kind of unserious brand of basketball. And maybe if you're Charlotte, like certainly if I were running them, I would investigate it as quietly as I could, of course. But there's maybe a feeling that LaMelo, if they're not going to start hitting the gas here as an organization, that he might want out. I've mentioned before that I think he provides them with nice cover for how abjectly terrible they are and how empty the cupboard is. Like if you just look at their basketball reference page, I did this a few days ago for the segment of the 15 and 60 on them, just the number of horrendous players who are playing for them this season. So I don't know that they can get out of that quickly. Now, again, if like they get Cooper Flag, then yeah, keep LaMelo around. We got Brandon Miller. That's our team. We'll try to keep building. So that is a pretty interesting one, though. I mean, we haven't like this is very early on for a guy who's gotten a contract like that to get moved. I realize these Charlotte might be kind of different cats at this point, and I laud that, but it would be a fairly unprecedented move to trade a guy like him
Right.
in the position that they are as an organization.
Yeah, because he's still in his early 20s. So yeah, the timing there is it's a little curious because of that. But they're not in a position to win right now, and they don't look like that's like just around the corner either.
All right, my 4th round pick.
Mm-hmm.
I got a list of names here I really want to try to decide on. I think Trae Young has got to be in there now at this point. I know we talked about him last year.
Yeah.
Like he's going to be eligible for a huge extension. And because his current contract is so big, he can build off of that and get up to really almost 35% of the salary cap. I mean, I guess he still would be subject to the 30% max or 105% of what he's making now.
Yeah.
But he's making a lot. He's a player option for 48 in 26-27. He's making 46. I'm sorry, 49 in 26-27. He's making 46 next year.
Yeah.
And so even a 5% raise off of that is quite a bit. And yeah, you know what? Actually, the 30% max. Yeah, so he'll be limited to 105% raise of what he's making now, but that still is close to the 35% max for him. I mean, I would imagine if Atlanta just offers him the most they can in an extension, that he would take it. He was extension eligible already. He could have signed a 3-year extension this off season, didn't do it. Doesn't appear that was offered. So I think this is more like, as we know, the Hawks don't have control of their draft in 26 or 27. The fantasy of sending him to San Antonio and getting their picks back was obviated by the De'Aaron Fox trade.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes like, who wants to trade for Trae and pay him? Like, it seems like it makes the most sense for him to stay there, but I'm just not sure they're going to be able to agree on the money.
Well, especially if the Hawks try to hold the line with him. And the interesting part is, like, even if he demanded a trade, I think the thing the Hawks found out low key, the last cycle a year ago, was that nobody is really champing at the bit to acquire him. Just because he's a hard guy to plug in if you already have guys in different spots. Like with Atlanta, because he's the engine of the offense and it's always been that way, he's more valuable to the Hawks than almost anywhere else. And then the other thing we've seen this season is that it does seem to me like he's had a lot more trouble beating guys one-on-one as he gets, deeper into his 20s. And that's, at his size, I mean, that's got to be a concern. How well is he going to age over the life of whatever this extension is going to be? There's an incentive for the Hawks to maybe do something here just because you could say, okay, we're all in on going young then, right? Like Atlanta's in a different spot than it was even 18 months ago because now they have Daniels, they have Reese Shea, Onyeka Okongwu looks more like a fairly legit starting center. Like they have young guys. That Jalen Johnson has blown up, obviously. Like they have more of a youth kind of upswing thing that they can sell people on, even if they don't have Trey. But man, they like offensively, like they still really need him. So it's a tough spot that they're in. That's why I didn't go that high on him, just because I wasn't sure who the team was that was really going to make the offer that the Hawks couldn't refuse. And I still wasn't sure how the Hawks functioned if they were without him for a whole season as opposed to like a game here, a game there.
No, it's a great point. But before I react to that, I want to say that you're saying champing at the bit rather than chomping, which of course is correct. It is certainly an apogee of our diction here on the podcast. So I just want to congratulate
what a moment
for that.
This is amazing.
I guess this is a public pod. People didn't get that.
This is definitely going on the greatest hits CD, right?
Yeah, but when I misused that word last year, or last week. Yeah, as I go through the teams, the Magic probably doesn't fit into the salary structure, even though it seems like after this year they could really use him. Miami could use a guard, but they've got So sorry, who were you gonna say?
Orlando to me was the most likely team for him, just fit wise. They have all the defenders who can cover for him. They desperately need some more sources of offense, right? So they don't really have an established point guard right now. So that's the one that probably makes the most sense. And it still doesn't. The story still doesn't totally add up for me even there.
I would say Brooklyn would have made sense, but then they traded for their picks back, and they still have their pick in 26. They don't have it in 27. And, the Wizards aren't going to hit the gas yet. In Utah, maybe if they like that could be one that might make sense if they get their guy in the draft. Yeah. That's one that could possibly make sense there.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's about it. I really don't see much more there as to where he would make sense. I mean, like Houston, maybe they would just like would they just like trade Jalen Green? But then they still have Reed Shepherd too. Like they're not going to do it would have to be like they would have to trade something that wasn't very much. It was like, hey, let's see how it works on a 1-year trial, and then we'll decide whether we're going to pay you afterwards.
Yeah,
because we think you can help us this year. Like I that doesn't really make much sense to me. So it may even end up being a situation where if I'm Atlanta, I just kind of take it to free agency. Like the offers are so bad, he still helps us next year when we don't have our pick, but we don't want to give him some massive deal. He also has that player option for the last year or two. Mm-hmm. We could even end up in a situation where he ends up like opting into that. It's just so yeah, you've kind of talked me out of this one a little bit. I certainly think there will be, in some ways, both sides will want to investigate the possibility of him moving on. But given the money situation, I don't know how big of a market there is for him outside of Atlanta, either in terms of paying his next contract or being willing to give the Hawks enough stuff that they're just like, hey, you know what? We don't have our pick. Let's just win some games.
Yeah.
Next for you.
Next guy for me, we talked about him a little bit last year, is Jaylen Brown. Just because I think financially, Boston's going to hit a point where they have to trade somebody between getting hit by the repeater and getting hit by the apron. And the repeater is actually going to hit him harder first. And it's going to depend a little bit on what happens with the sale. But Uh, him making 53, 57, 61, 65, like that's going to be tough for them to continue absorbing. And ideally they would trade other guys, but I just don't know what that looks like for them in terms of getting value back and really being able to move the contracts. Like Drew Holiday's at his number right now. I don't know what the market is going to be for him. When you talk
Yeah,
about going out
yeah,
3 years, 105 for him, uh,
yeah. That now they could just pay somebody to take him in terms of
yeah,
assets. Maybe that's what it is. But now that we've extended this time, I thought maybe we were a little early in talking about him last year. We
mm-hmm.
didn't know obviously that the Celtics were going to win the championship and be as good as they are again this year, and then he would
Yeah,
win Finals MVP. But I do think it's between Porzingis or Holiday. Like if
yeah,
you're Boston, you really got to keep those guys together. It seems like at this point. But yeah, maybe they just investigate and see if they can get some massive haul to rebuild around Tatum. But like Brown is just so important to what, like, having those two guys is still the foundation of everything they do on both ends of the floor. Like, yeah, having Derek White and Horford, like those guys are huge too. But just having that level of versatility from both those guys is massive. So I do think it's possible, particularly, it could be a lot of water under the bridge for Boston between now and 2026.
yeah. That's
But I
if they
think
have
they'll,
it would require two non-championship postseasons. I think that's
yeah,
what would be required. But then I think they would look really hard at it at that point.
yeah, and I do think you just have so many other ways to cut money, especially for guys that aren't going to be effective anymore, that it probably would have gone. And of course, we don't even know who the new owner is going to be. We were supposed
That's
there's reporting that we were going to find out about like bids or something. Bids were due like a month ago. We haven't heard anything about that yet.
yeah. Last I
That's
heard when I
interesting.
was up there that it's moving a little slower and the price might be a little lower than people thought. So we'll see where this ends up. Yep.
Yeah, because their arena situation sucks. Now, if
Yeah,
someone
that's
is
the thing everyone
enterprising enough,
forgets.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, if someone's enterprising enough to get them a new arena, you could really turn that team into a cash cow. But they're not really that right now, from everything I've heard. Okay, next pick for you here. Oh yeah, you just did Jalen Brown.
Yep.
Yeah, we should probably move into a little bit more of a lightning run here.
Yeah, I would be down with that.
Well, we did get some reporting last week that one Domantas Sabonis will be inquiring as to the
Mm-hmm.
direction of the
Mm-hmm.
organization this offseason.
Yes. Yes. Interesting timing. I didn't put him on the list because I just didn't know who actually was gonna end up paying for him. Right? Like what
I God, I hope we find out. I
the
really,
the end game of the
it will
trade with him
be
is really hard.
fascinating. No, it is. Which, yeah,
Trae Young for Domantas Sabonis challenge trade.
so Sabonis makes 44, 47, and 50
Yeah,
the
that's a
next
thing.
3
Like
years
his
after
number
this
on
one.
that extension is high.
Yeah, he's 29 right now. Actually missing a little bit of time with a hamstring as we speak, but should be back momentarily. And I don't foresee the Kings, like, they might make the playoffs, probably won't at this point. Like, they're looking like they're probably in the 9 seed, but
I think they could beat the
much can
Clippers.
change between now and the end of the season. You think they would beat the Clippers in a series?
I think they can beat the Clippers in an 8-9.
Yeah, no, they could. I wouldn't favor them, but yeah, it's in a one. But yeah, I'm saying I don't. I think it's probably less likely they make the playoffs. But they clearly, I mean, they're totally dysfunctional, obviously, given all the reporting that's come out, particularly from your shop on that. However, it seems like as long as they have Sabonis, they're just all in on average. Like, that's basically what you are when you get Sabonis. Like, that 3 seed year was the total high water mark. It
Yeah.
seems like it's going to be,
Which
and
is
yeah, you
why
might, yeah,
I have the perfect destination for him, actually. Toronto
Chicago.
Raptors. Oh, Chicago's even for yeah.
Well, who are they? Like, Toronto is like incredibly expensive.
They are
already.
expensive right now. I know. It'd have to be like
Yeah.
Barrett and some other stuff. So it might be tricky for them.
Yeah.
And
Maybe
then
Toronto could be a Trey Young suitor too. Like he would actually fit in pretty like quickly and Barrett for Trey Young.
that might be a
But
nice deal. That's an interesting
but that
trade
yeah,
right
like
there.
yeah, Young and Ingram and Barnes is not really that
Mhm.
amazing either.
Nah.
But that's back to Sabonis though. Yeah, I'm not sure. Like he would be certainly a very good fit with what Chicago is trying to do. Big Lithuanian community there too.
Yeah.
So like that.
Show Modest Buzelis the way.
Yeah. No, you're right. But yeah, so that's the sort of team. But if they investigate his trade value, is it like there's nowhere where he's gonna have a better chance to win that he's gonna get traded to that's gonna want him than Sacramento that I can think of at this point. So
That, yeah.
I wanted to discuss him. I actually, despite that reporting, you have to respect that. I would imagine he will have that conversation, but I just don't think with all the factors, the amount of money that he makes, teams that might be interested, I don't know that there'll be a better place for him. He also probably have some input into who the coach is going to be going forward, but definitely doesn't seem like the situation in Sacramento is a place people want to be right
Yeah. But it's similar to Trey a little bit in that he's at a level where it's hard to find a team that is both better and has a need for him. Right.
now. Yeah. And if they do get him, they might be worse.
Well, that too. But
Like because if you're really good, then you have the guys who can do what he can do on offense already, and it's hard to imagine you're gonna make your defense better by adding him at center. Okay, your next one.
so my next one is kind of the same thing a little bit. Is Zion Williamson, right? It's like if he's healthy enough, then New Orleans doesn't want to trade him, and if he's not healthy, then no one else wants to trade for him, especially at the quantity of assets that New Orleans would demand. So it gets really tricky in the to like the timing in the real world of when side A and side B would both be able to meet. But New Orleans is, I mean, they're so deep into this project. They still haven't won with him. So what's next? Can they ever get him healthy for a full season and just kind of go? And if not, are they better off cashing in their stock?
He's certainly looked very good lately. Like he
Yeah.
can't jump the way he did when he was younger, but he looks really fast out on the floor. Like some of those off the dribble moves he was making against the Clippers last night, like splitting pick and rolls, blowing to the rim off of 1 foot, right-handed dunks. Like it is, he was back in full on point Zion mode last night. Had the triple double. This is another team where it really matters what happens to them in the draft. And but like his contract also has all these non-guarantees. So
Yeah.
if he just plays the way he's been playing the last month or so, yeah, they'll absolutely hold on to him at that. Like they still have business considerations. Also might depend on who's going to be in charge there as well. And
Yeah.
the Murray Achilles definitely really hurts them too. But Trey Murphy is looking really good there too. If you could
Yeah.
just get a center with a pulse, or Eve Misi can develop there, uh, and they still have these financial issues too, but they got themselves out of jail at least a little bit there by moving Ingram.
Yeah,
So
that was the
yeah, I mean
biggest
they
one.
should have a top 5 pick potentially, and that's Cooper Flag actually would be a great fit next to Zion. So would Ace Bailey, frankly, but
Hmm.
that's I just don't think it's gonna happen. I think he just is like because especially you don't feel this need of like, oh yeah, he's a ticking time bomb. We got to move him now
Yeah.
when he has that non-guarantee.
Yeah, that always gives you the out. You're never gonna be stuck with the contract. You're just gonna lose out on whatever assets you could have gotten at the time, which may not even be that high right now. So that's why I didn't have him higher on my list. That's why he's in the lightning round.
Okay, let me throw a few more out here for you.
Okay.
Alperen Şengün.
So he was the one I looked at when I came up with it, Jalen Green. I figured Green would be first, but Şengün was definitely on my list of like, oh yeah, that could be a thing. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, that wouldn't shock me at all. If he like, especially if he's in a deal to get them a bigger piece somehow. Um, so yeah, Şengün for Sabonis,
They would,
Nate.
well, Şengün's better than Sabonis right now, so
Yeah,
that's probably
that
not a
would
good
be
idea.
the problem there.
But yeah, that's one where, especially if they acknowledge that in terms of their long-term salary structure, it was just going to be too difficult to trade for someone and also have him. But then they would need a center,
Yes.
like pairing him and Devin Booker, for example, to recite their. I mean, yeah, should Devin Booker be on this list too? Yeah,
So
we probably should. We probably should talk about. We're talking about. We're going
yeah.
through all the way
No,
through to next
I
summer
had
now.
Booker I had Booker on my list by the time you get to 26 because the problem is whatever the Suns want to do, like Booker could decide to push his way out. He is now, to be clear, all his stated stuff has been all in. I love the Valley, I love Phoenix, yada yada. But if he sees how dire their situation is by next summer, you wonder if that will continue or if he says, "Hey, you know what, guys, it's been great and all, but like let's do what's best for both of us here." Because I mean, that's Phoenix's way out too, is trading him to try to get their picks back. So I think there's a lot of logic both ways, and it may take some time for everyone to see how compelling that logic is and for it to win out. But we have, like we said, we have 3 cycles here. So yeah, I think Booker definitely needs to be on the list.
And who's their second best player going to be after they trade KD? Like they're not going to make the playoffs next year unless something crazy happens. Are they going to hire another new coach? Also, doesn't
Yeah,
seem like
seems
Booker and
trending.
Bud are old pals here.
seems trending that way. No, like a Booker Bull combination. No.
Yeah, and Booker will still have 2 years left on his deal after next year, and
Yes.
then maybe he could sign an extension for 3 years, which would be, and he would be 30 at that point, just
Yeah.
about. So that would be so 30, 31, that to go 3 more years to be 32 through 34, making 35% of the salary cap, like that would be pretty enticing for him potentially. However, yeah, just I mean, they're probably not going to make the playoffs this year, and then they're probably not going to make the playoffs next year, and then what?
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Especially because like if I'm him, I'm like, yeah, what are you going to get by trading KD that's going to make us good? I mean,
Yeah.
they're like, oh yeah, we want like 2 good players and a draft. It's like, all right,
Yeah.
we'll see
Okay.
about that.
Here's what you're actually gonna get. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so Booker, I think we probably should have talked about him more, just again because of the time horizon. I'm not saying he won't get traded this offseason. I would imagine. Although who knows? Who knows? Maybe like the KD thing, things will just go so
Yeah.
badly by the end of this. But um, anyone else you really think we should hit on?
So I had 2 players left on my list. Uh, and this is probably more a 26 thing. Those 2 players are Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green.
Yeah, like because there just has to be some matching salary for the big move by Golden State if it happens.
Uh, yes, and they may also be, they may also decide it's tapped out by then. And I don't think they will ever trade Curry, but
No,
I do think the other guys they would reach a point where they would say, okay, like we can, it's okay to cash out of this now, or it's okay to trade Butler in a first for a guy who's 23 years old or something, So I even as committed as they seem to that right now, and that may be the case all the way through this season and all the way through next season too. By the time you get to summer 26, though, when they all have 1 year left on their deals, I think that's a potential pivot point certainly for the Warriors.
let me throw a few more names out there for you.
Okay.
Kyrie Irving actually can be a free agent this offseason. I imagine they're going to offer him what it takes to get him back. Of course, he's hurt, but it could be another one of these things where if new management comes in Dallas and they move AD, it would also make sense to move Kyrie at that point.
That's true. Yeah. Okay. That's a
If
good one.
Domantas Sabonis is moving Zach LaVine would probably also make sense, particularly as he gets closer to the end of his contract.
See,
I
I
don't know
thought
if
about
DeMar
writing
DeRozan
him.
qualifies. Yeah.
I thought about putting him in just because, and DeRozan as well, just because any move Sacramento makes, especially if they try to do something relatively big, almost has to involve one of those two guys. So yeah, as I think about DeRozan, especially, is probably a pretty good name there.
Julius Randle, did make the All-Star team last year. It's going to be a free agent. We could move on. Just wanted to say him though.
No, I mean Randall was gonna be the match again when they to get KD, right? So yeah, clearly.
Probably going to opt in this offseason too. Two more names for you.
Okay.
Jaren Jackson Jr.
No way. Not happening.
Just because, well, I'm saying that he would just leave.
No, I think the Grizzlies have set themselves up so that won't happen.
That they'll renegotiate and extend him. He's just automatically going to take that.
I think so. Yeah, they're going to be able to get to a high enough number that it wouldn't make any sense for him to turn it down.
No, I think you're probably right there, but it's still like it's tough to extend him right now. And yeah, they did set themselves up to do it. But anyone who's coming up on free agency, even John Morant, I know Zach Kleiman was very much like, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. But
that was the one I thought about more than Jaren, to be honest.
Me too.
That's the one to me that it just seemed like there might be like just something opportunistic that comes up where they're like, okay, we can move on from this. We can move on from this because I'm getting X, Y, and Z. Like that one I actually can see.
Yeah, so Memphis is an absolutely fascinating team over the next season and change. Tyrese Maxey.
Yeah. Just because that's the only way they can get stuff?
Well, just like the Embiid screw is over. Paul George is a massive albatross, or he gets moved. He's played so badly he didn't even fall onto this list for me, and probably has a Noah trade clause as well. And so it's just with Tyrese, it's like we're going nowhere. We're really now Philly in terms of their picks. Worth noting what things look like for their future. They have their 26 pick outright. Their 27 first to Brooklyn is top 8 protected. Although some of these will be moved back if they retain their pick this year. Then they would have 27 outright, and 28 would be top 8 protected, and top 4 protected next year in 26. So maybe we'll try for it next year with Joel and PG and Tyrese, and we get to the summer of 26. It hasn't worked. We have no plan of being better. Joel is done. Paul George is done. And let's just we'll tank for our pick this year in 27, assuming they retained it. And then they do move on to the next year. A lot depends too on who they get in the draft this year. If they get anybody, that could be a big part of it as well. But just wanted to consider it because it looks like he's a really good player on a team that is more than likely going to be going absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, that's a good one. I do think they owe it to themselves to ride it out at least through next year and see where Joel is. But yeah, I think as a 26 guy, I could totally see that.
Well, they owe it to Joel too. They owe him about
yeah, right.
about $200 million worth.
Yeah.
Much more than that actually over 4 years. Yeah, his
Although
$69 million player option.
That money could get, can I say, kiboshed, because it could be taken off the cap if he's in medical retirement.
Oh, yeah, I think Bosch is too sad of a story. I don't want to name that after him.
All right.
Maybe Darius Miles.
Okay, all right, that's good.
for the long-term injury
then
exclusion.
then they'll send the Grizzlies threatening letters when they sign him to a 10-day. Yeah.
All right, then. Well, this was very interesting. I think this is an important exercise that we do. As we said on last year's show, this is not just like clickbait. This is what every person in every front office is doing all the time.
100%.
So we're trying to
Yep.
we're trying to
Trying to
give
get
you
ahead
a
of it.
window
Yeah.
into that. Yeah.
Yep.
So these are all things that have come up for sure. Is there anyone that you feel much more likely about to be traded after we talked about him now? Or traded, or I guess you could leave in free agency too.
Yeah. Maxey, certainly. And then I'm trying to remember, you brought up someone pretty early where I was like, oh yeah, I should have probably had him higher.
Lillard.
Yeah, that was the one.
Lillard was the one you said, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would say I feel less likely about Trae Young after we talked it through. I think you made some good points on that one. And yeah, Markkanen too is probably the other one that stuck out to me where I'm like, yeah, it probably makes sense to move them unless they're really ready to hit the gas next year.
Yeah.
All right, then. We will talk to y'all next week. We did a hiatus for our coach rankings, and we'll finish those out next week. Till then.